Hey, welcome to the Proving God's Will podcast. I am Pastor Jason Lohorn and your host. Listen, I'm hoping today's episode will inform you, challenge you, and cause you to follow Jesus Christ. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get to it. All right, today on the podcast, we are going to go into a series that I'm going to call 10 Ways to Be a Successful Leader. Now, back in 2023, one of my earlier podcasts, I touched on these top 10 leadership tips, and we sort of did a flyover maybe at 10,000 feet, and we touched on these just a little bit. But today we're going to launch into a new series where we're going to touch on each one of these in a separate episode. And so if you're a leader, maybe you're a leader in your church, maybe you're a leader in your business, maybe you're part of a large corporation, or maybe you work at a plant, and there's this leadership structure, and you find that you're somewhere in that structure, and you've got people that you report to, and you've got people that look to you for leadership. And then there's times that it may be ministry related. You may be a pastor, you may be someone that serves in a church, or you're on a committee and you're leading a group and you're wondering how you can operate. And so today we're going to give you some practical leadership tips. And of these 10 tips, and we're going to be going over this over 10 different episodes. And these are in no particular order, but the one I want to talk about today is being the last to speak. Being the last to speak. Now, I've been in leadership ever since I was about 18. For about 13 years, I was in the automotive industry before I went into full-time ministry. So 9 of those years were at Beeman Automotive Group in downtown Nashville. And Lee Beeman was a multimillionaire, great leader. He had great respect for his employees. If he walked through our department once in 3 months, which was about the way it was, he knew people's names. He knew what you did for the company. It was great to watch him operate. I've been in meetings with him and other leaders when I was really young. I mean, I was 19 or 20 years old when I probably was in my first leadership type meeting where I was sitting in with some high-ranking type leaders in the dealership. We were actually working through some customer service issues. And I remember Lee Beeman looking across the table, and it was kind of weird. The way we were sitting, I was in a meeting with sales managers, parts managers, different types of department leads, things like that. And I had been asked to sit in on this meeting because I worked in the service department. I wasn't the service manager, but I think I was sort of a problem solver. And so we at the time had a customer service issue. We had not won the President's Award, which we had won many years in a row. And Lee Beeman was wanting to get to the bottom of why we did not win this award. And so he had this meeting. We were going to pull out all the stops and do whatever we could to make sure that our customer service was the best that it could be. And I'll always remember this. We were sitting at this table, and it was like a conference room table, and Lee Beeman was on one end. And when I came into the room, and when we all just sort of went to chairs to sit down, I happened to be at the other end of the table. I mean, like across from him, like way down at the other end. And so I had this direct view of him. You know, he was looking me straight in the eyes. And there's probably about 8 of us in that meeting. And I remember him, we were working through things, and him just looking at me and say, "Jason, what do you think we should do?" And and I remember thinking, oh, my goodness. And right about that time, I just spoke up, and I said, I think that we need to take all of these customer complaints that we've had. And listen, there were complaints and it wasn't a lot, but the ones that we had could have been related to sales, service, parts, body shop, you name it. I said, I think we ought to divide these out. Not by department, just randomly give each one of us a handful of these, and let each one of us call each one of these customers and find out why they gave us this horrible score. And then we need to take some notes on that, bring it back, and let's have discernment whether the complaint was valid. Some people just complain for whatever reason. I said, but let's take a look at that, and then let's turn around and do whatever we can to make sure that we make it right with these people that's already reported on us. So in going forward, before we interact with new customers and try to pave some new path for customer service, let's fix what we've done in the past. He said, all right, we'll do that. And so that's what we did. And we also had complete authority to help those customers get it right. And I remember one of the customers that I called had a problem with the body shop, and I had to go over to the body shop and listen. They repainted a vehicle because I said so, and so, but we were acting under the authority of Lee Beeman, but in that meeting, Lee Beeman, he had an idea, I think, of maybe what the problems were, but he didn't start out by blasting us or giving us his opinion. He did go around the room, and that was the moment where he pointed at me and said, "Jason, what do you think?" I don't know if I planned on saying a whole lot when I went into that meeting, but he went around the room and got our thoughts, and then at the end, he made his assessment. And maybe that's where this part of this leadership tip formed in me, from being the last to speak. Now, in a group setting, or you're in a on a committee, something like that, and maybe you're the chairperson or the leader. If possible, you need to let everyone in the room speak. Now, larger meetings, I get it, that could be difficult, but let's say you're in a meeting and there's 10 people in that meeting, and you're on a committee, and maybe you're looking for ideas. Maybe it's not heavy, it's just you're looking at ideas. Maybe you're in a church, maybe it's outreach type things or whatever. And listen, let everyone speak. Just ask people, what do you think? And listen to what they have to say. Listen to their whys and their hows, and why we should be doing what we're doing, or how we're going to pull that off. But let people speak. It's good to know, where people are coming from. When we ask, well, hey, listen, how did you get to that conclusion, or how did you think of that? It's good to know how people got from A to B to C, to kind of know how they're thinking. Also, people get a chance to share their thoughts. And I know this isn't utopian. It's not ideal all the time. And I know that sometimes leaders have to call shots, and it's not collaboration. I get it. There's a time when a leader has to just call a shot. And there's times that you're in a meeting where we are collaborating. And when we do that, we need to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak. Now, that doesn't guarantee that everyone will speak or want to speak. A lot of times people don't want to speak. They just want to be there and listen and nod their head and maybe say yes at the end. But you want to encourage people, to say something. Share your thoughts. I always want to know, I want to know people's perspective. What do you think from your chair, from, someone in your age group? What do you think about this thing? And so when we do that, it helps people know that they've been heard. It doesn't mean that, you go around the room and there's 8 different thoughts about something, that you're going to embrace everyone's thought. I mean, you do have to be prepared to, boil it down and find the direction to lead the group in. But at least everyone feels like they've been heard. And I think today that's a big thing, is that we make sure people, in their opinion, can be heard. Also, too, when we go about this process where we allow everyone to weigh in, you also have more buy-in. People will feel like they've been part of the process. And to me, everyone needs to be part of the process. And for me as a leader, I know I'm an idea guy. I've always been an idea guy. I'm usually not short on ideas. But what I found, when we're collaborating, somebody may take this idea that I may have, or somebody else may have in the room, and by the time we talk about it, it could get adjusted, it could get tweaked, it could get massaged into being something that's even better than what the original person said, or the original thought. It could be enhanced. And so again, there's a great need for us to collaborate and listen to what each person says. Additionally, I think when we speak to topics in current events and things like that, when we're having to weigh in and we have a heavy opinion about something, I've always heard it said this way, that we need to save our strongest words for the strongest issues. And so while if you're in leadership, you probably are, have some opinions. Sometimes as leaders, we're heavily opinionated. I'm one of those sometimes. It doesn't always warrant you and I giving our strong convictions in every meeting. Now, if we're in a church setting, or we're in some type of Christian type setting where there's some kind of doctrinal issue, our strongest convictions are probably going to come out. Our strongest words are probably going to need to be shared at that moment when we're talking about something that heavy that's on the line. But in your work and you're collaborating with some leaders about doing this or that, and you have a heavy opinion about why we should or shouldn't do something, just weigh it out and ask yourself, do I need to share that in this setting? Is that going to be beneficial or not? And it may be. Maybe the group needs to hear what you have to say about that, or maybe it's saved for another time. But I do know this. We don't want to lose our opportunity to be an influence over something small or insignificant. So if you're a leader and you're in front of your group, be careful with what you're willing to lose your influence over. And so, and with that said, not everything rises to such a level that you need to die on that hill. So, but back to what I'm saying, being the last to speak, I'll give you a practical way of how this has played out. At least a couple of times in the ministry for me. It's actually I've practiced this a lot, but in ministry there was two times when I was pastoring two different churches and we had huge decisions to make, and I put this leadership principle into practice. Back in about 2004, I was pastoring Rocky Valley Baptist Church in Lebanon, Tennessee, and the church had been needing to add on to its facility even prior to me coming. They had had a couple different recommendations to build a fellowship hall, additional restrooms, and some educational space a couple of different times in the past, but yet that motion it failed to see the light of day. It did not get off the ground, or the church would almost approve it and then they would just not take action on it. So when I got to Rocky Valley in 2000, it was my first church. Things began to happen. The church began to grow. I think about year 2 when I was there, we really began to see the church take off. And this need for this space was even more prevalent. We needed to do it. And so we were in a deacons meeting, and I remember there was a guy by the name of Chris Haynes. He was one of our deacons. And he said, he says, we really need to be adding on this space. And we had been talking about it off and on. He said, I think I'm going to bring that to the business meeting and say something. And I said, well, I said, the bylaws of our church say that the Property and Grounds Committee, when considering altering the property or the buildings or adding on to the facility, that they actually respond to the needs of the program leaders and what those programs need. I said, if you bring that up in the business meeting, that we should be looking to build a building for the future of the ministry, I said, then what I would do as the moderator, I said, the way that business would be handled, you can't flesh all of that out on the business meeting floor. I mean, you can't, spend 3 hours talking about what kind of building to build or all those things. What you do is you go by the bylaws. Well, the bylaws of that church said, it says the Property and Grounds responds to the program leaders. So we had a group called Church Council, which we met once a quarter, and that was every church leader of every department. We would meet once a quarter, and mainly we would go over calendar items and different things like that. And that way the right hand would know what the left hand was doing, and we would lay things into the calendar together to make sure that there was balance and things like that. And so I was used to being in those meetings, but that's where this would be discussed. And so back to the business meeting, Chris stood up. He says, you know what? I think we need to be looking at our future. We all know that we probably need to build a building, and we need some things. And I referred his discussion or motion to the church council to discuss, and I shared with them what the bylaws said concerning how Property and Grounds then responds to the program leaders and what they say their department needs. So I called a meeting. Well, what I said that night to the program leaders that were there, and I said to them, we'll meet in 2 weeks, and we're going to discuss what each of our departments need. And so I maybe I sent out an email as well to the leaders to say, hey, be thinking about this and come to this meeting prepared to talk about your department and what you may need in terms of space or resources. So we had a meeting, and I remember it was in the old Sunday school wing, and the meeting was actually where my office would later become, down on the end. And we were sitting there, and this reminder to me of how Lee Beeman operated came to my mind is that, you know what? I have a really, and listen, I've got an idea about everything usually, but I had an idea of what we needed to build. I really thought we needed a fellowship hall. We needed additional restrooms badly. We needed maybe a couple of large classrooms. We needed then to take the old basement, which was the old fellowship hall, and we needed to rework that and remodel it and make additional educational space down there. And so that's what I thought. And I thought, but you know what? I'm going to this meeting, and the last thing I needed to do was just spill it out and say, this is what I think we ought to do. No, I was sitting there and I asked everyone, did y'all think about it from your department? They said yes. And then I said, all right, starting with my person to my left, I said, we're going to go around the room and we're going to take notes. I'm going to write this stuff down. Tell me from your department what you think we need to do in terms of space and resources that will help your department, not only today, but going forward. And by the time that thing had circled the room and gotten around to about 7 or 8 people, and by the way, the chairman of the Property and Grounds Committee, Building and Grounds Committee, they were in there too. By the time it made it around the room to me, I didn't have to say anything in terms of what I thought we should build or what we needed. It was pretty much laid out. I was the last to speak. And so we had a lot of buy-in. The project that we actually pursued then was not just the preacher's idea or any one person's idea. It was a collaborative effort, and we all agreed on it. And so when we had our list, we agreed that these things need to be looked at. Now, I would take that list to the Building and Grounds or Property and Grounds Committee meeting, and we would discuss these things. And some of those things, the bylaws talked about the fact that if the Property Committee felt like they could, meet these needs, then they would go to the Finance Committee and find the appropriate funding and things like that. And so there were a few things on the list that we could take care of pretty quickly without spending a ton of money. It was just maybe moving this or that. One of those was we moved the pews from the choir loft. I think there were 4 pews in the choir loft, and we found a way to put 2 of them back into the sanctuary seating. So we needed sanctuary seating was one thing, and so we found a way to put 2 of them, and they were long ones, so they were like 10 foot, I guess. We found a way to put 2 more pews into the congregational setting. Then we made the decision that we would make a recommendation to buy chairs to put back into the choir loft that would be very comfortable. And the choir then, because of the sanctuary being packed, the choir then would stay up. Like while I preached, they'd stay up behind me. And so, but that again went through. The music department was good with that. They were good with the transition of instead of the choir coming down and sitting in the congregation, they stayed up behind me. Listen, the choir made, it wasn't that they took a vote in the choir, but the worship leader, choir leader said to them, I think we're going to have to do this for a little while until we can figure out space. And so the church then approved buying those chairs, and that was a small piece of business. We may have spent $2,000 for those chairs. I can't remember, but anyhow, so we started, just checking off that list of what we gave to the property committee. But listen, there was total buy-in. Everyone knew what we were doing and why. But in that meeting, I was the last to speak. And so had a lot of buy-in. Everyone got a chance to be heard. And listen, every now and then you get in a meeting like that and you try to be the last to speak and you go around the room and people won't say much. They'll be quiet. But then you'll get outside of that meeting and in the hallway or the next day, they want a private one-on-one with you to tell you how much they don't like any of it. And at that moment, as a leader, you'll have to probably say something like I've had to say a couple of times in my years. Say, hey, listen, why didn't you say that yesterday in the meeting? Why didn't you share that with everyone else? We probably could have benefited from hearing your reason why you don't think this will work. Why wouldn't you speak up? And so for me, it was a teachable moment where I could try to teach sometimes an older person than me, try to teach them that, listen, the time to talk about that was yesterday. Not Some people want a private one-on-one with the so-called leader, and they want to manipulate the leader or try to, steer him in a direction. And listen, there's a lot of unofficial meetings that happen in businesses, in companies, in churches that are down the hall. A lot of decisions about churches are made at someone's kitchen table, not at a church meeting, and so or in the parking lot. I'm well aware of that. I've been a pastor 25 years. I know how this goes, but I always encourage people, listen, I need you to speak up when we're actually in the meeting to discuss this thing, because this is not a private meeting where me and you are going to decide all of this. Now, there are things that leaders have to call a shot on, and sometimes it's 2 or 3 people collaborating. It is very informal, absolutely. But on some very big things, listen, it's in a meeting setting, and everyone needs to speak up. And you, as the leader, oftentimes be the last to speak. You want buy-in from the other people. You want them to be heard. And listen, they may have ideas that need to come to the table. Your idea may be part of it. I get it. And listen, especially when we're doing these things for the Lord, we don't need to get hung up on who gets the credit. It's not about, whose name is going to be remembered as doing this or that. And every now and then, people remember me for just leading the process, but I remind them, listen, this was the church's decision. The church rallied behind this thing. God gave the vision. We're always trying to point people to God because He is the one that gives us the vision. But in leadership, if you're in a meeting and you're trying to get buy-in and you really want to hear from your people that are in your department and you're the one that's having to call the meeting, listen, be the last to speak. Now, lay the groundwork for the meeting to say, hey, listen, I need y'all to come and be willing to tell me what's going on or give me the ideas that you think or the opinions you have. And then we're going to talk about it and we're going to determine how we need to go forward. And you may have to make the hard decision at the end as a leader. It may land on you to actually, summarize it all and bring it to a head or whatever, but at least everyone gets heard. You can collaborate and find what is your committee or what is your department thinking. Listen, that is proving God's will. We're talking about 10 leadership tips, and that's just one of them, being the last to speak. Thanks for tuning in, and be sure and share this podcast with others. Thanks.